All right, folks. It's about 9 o'clock. We got a couple of minutes here. Well, maybe not. All right, folks. It's about 9 o'clock. We have about a little over a minute before then, but I wanted to get started. I found out a couple of new things I might try tonight. Found a way to share the screen that I'm looking at, so I might do that just for a moment. But I wanted to apologize. A couple of nights ago, I did Exodus 13 through 14. I was very distracted. Not going to get into why, but I was just not at my best. Hey, Brian, welcome aboard. And also had some technical difficulties. My kids had unplugged the microphone, and I didn't do a tech check like I did the night before. So I'm pretty sure this microphone is working tonight. Y'all should be able to hear me fairly clearly. Hey, Steven, welcome aboard. But give me some feedback if you can hear my voice clearly. Then that means the big mic is working. If not, then I'm not sure. I might. It is clear. Okay, good. I didn't want to have to. I'm gonna re-record, not live, but I'm gonna re-record 13 and 14 for YouTube. Go back over the same information. It's not a screen recorder. You can actually do it in Facebook Live if you're on the computer. So you would, in the preview window where you're live, you can scroll down, and it's you could do a start screen share thing. Um, well, and then apparently you can only do that before you start. I guess I don't know. Well, I guess I'm not. There's still some things I have to learn about doing it this way. Thanks, Nate. I appreciate it, and I'm glad you're here. But anyway, one of these days I'm gonna get this up and running where I can do the window in a window where I can be kind of talking up in the window and uh, be showing you the screen at the same time so you can see where I'm at. But tonight we're gonna do Exodus 15 and 16, and I'm gonna have a map in the comments. I was looking around at some of the maps. A lot of the maps have the Israelites when they come out, when they cross the Red Sea. There's up at the top of the Red Sea. There's like this fork, and there's one that is very near to what we think of as Egypt and the Nile and all that. And then there's one that's closer to the land of the Philistines. And a lot of people that I have seen, a lot of maps that I have seen, show them crossing that first fork and then kind of going up from there. And I don't think that's accurate. I think they actually this map that I'm going to post up in the comments after I'm done has them kind of completely skipping that first fork, going over to the second fork and crossing uh, into the Sinai Peninsula to get into it. But eventually to get into Saudi Arabia, and that's where they've avoided the Philistines, and they're gonna cross over into Saudi Arabia to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They don't wander in that little peninsula right there that we call the Sinai Peninsula. They wander in Saudi Arabia, same place that Paul spent 3.5 years learning directly from Jesus after he became an apostle. So I'll post that up. It's a pretty good little map. I don't know if it's entirely accurate, but it seemed to fit better than any of the other maps that I found so far. So, all right, so let's get started. I'm going to be reading out of the King James. I have the ESV up for some modern stuff, and I have the original Hebrew. There's actually three things that I've pulled up that were names. One of them, especially, I thought was interesting that we'll get to in chapter 16, but nothing too complicated, and I don't think that there's anything just incredibly complicated here. But there are a few sections that we're going to cover. So glad you guys are here. If you want to go ahead and share the video if you think others we get something out of this. Steven says, "Hey, I think we may agree on that. I recently saw some info that supported that they crossed the waters right by Midian." Yeah, they definitely crossed. I don't believe that they crossed into. Like, I don't believe the wandering was in that little Sinai Peninsula because God took them away from the Philistines. I think they were out in Saudi Arabia the whole time. So All right, so let's get started. It says in chapter 15, verse 1, Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto Jehovah, and spake, saying, I will sing unto Jehovah, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. Jehovah is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him a habitation. My father's God, and I will exalt him. So in this, we have a song of praise for Jehovah God for saving them. Specifically, it's mentioned throwing the rider and the horse into the sea, talking about the chariots, showing God's glory and His majesty. And that's going to come up a number of times through the song. And they're going to point to why it was important that that happened, that God specifically waited for the Egyptians to do that instead of just, he could have just blocked them and they could have never passed and never gone into the sea and never been destroyed. But there was a reason that they did that God allowed them to pass into the sea and then be destroyed there. And there's a spiritual reason, which we talked about last time, where there was this type antitype, where not only is the baby nation of Israel saved, this new nation that comes up out of the water, a new nation, and is saved, but the sin or the bondage is destroyed. So there's the spiritual metaphor there, pointing the type pointing forward to the New Testament antitype, which is baptism, that so many don't think have anything to do with salvation. But the Bible is very clear over and over again that it is the point of salvation, that if you are not immersed in water, according to God's command, for the reason that God gives you, to have your sins remitted, to come into contact with the blood of Christ, to be buried as he was buried and rise up again, a new creature. That's we are recreated in baptism, just as Israel was recreated from a patriarchal group of slaves into a brand new nation. If you don't believe that that's why you're being baptized, you're just getting wet. If you're doing it as an outward sign that you've already been saved, that's not what the Bible says. If you're doing it just to obey a command, you're not doing it for the right reason. The Bible is very clear. 1 Peter 3:21, hearkening back to the flood, baptism doth also now save you. So here again, they talk about this in the song. They talk about how sin was destroyed, and then they say, "I will prepare him a habitation, a dwelling place." So there's a lot of prophecy that's going to come in verses 15 and 16. Not just these type antitypes, but they're direct pointing to things that are going to come, or some things that, as we read it, Moses is writing this later. He's not writing it as it's happening. He writes it later, towards the end of their wandering. And so we're going to see a reference to that here towards the end of our evening. So it says, verse 3, Jehovah is a man of war. Jehovah is his name. Now, there's a lot of things that God is, and he is eternal and perfect in all of those aspects. God is love. God is a jealous God. God is a man of war. Okay, a being of war. There are so many aspects of God, and they're all perfect, and they are all harmonious in that. So I'm gonna check over here for some comments. The one thing is I can't do is whereas before I was doing this on the screen and then I was doing the live on the phone, is I could see the comments as they came up. But let's see here. Yeah, they were completely out of Egypt. That's exactly right. And then Pharaoh left his own land in pursuit of Israel. Yes, he had to travel pretty far. He wasn't in Egypt anymore. Mikvah is what the Hebrews call baptism. Yes, Brian, and those washings that they did were ceremonious, and they were all types. Everything that the Old Testament has in relationship to that, the flood, the crossing of the Red Sea, the washing of Naaman, the mikvah, all of the cleansings and everything that you see with blood and water, are all pointers. They're all things that culminate in or point to, number one, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, but on top of that, the death, burial, and resurrection of ourselves. It is the death of our old man when we go down into the water, and it is where we contact the blood of Christ, according to First John chapter 5 verse 7, and it is where we come up a new creature. Romans 6 is very clear about that. And then there's Acts 22:16 talks about arise and be baptized, calling on the name of the Lord, washing away your sins. Ephesians 5:26 talking about the sanctifying of the wife, the bride, the church, by the washing of water by the word. So there's this power that is in the act of being baptized. Now I did a live about this a while back. I need to go find that because I didn't post that one up on YouTube. But a live I did about baptism and its importance a few weeks ago. So I'll get that one up on YouTube as well. But the washings, the mikvah, all of these things that are talked about in the Old Testament are types, and they all point forward to the New Testament antitype, the higher spiritual reality. Whereas we're stuck in the Old Testament with just physical metaphors and pictures pointing forward, and those things were shadows, according to the book of Hebrews. They weren't things that were to be permanent. They were just shadows of things to come, and that's why they had to be done away with, because the shadows didn't have any real power other than to teach. So continuing on, Exodus chapter 15, and we are in verse 4. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom as a stone. Thy right hand, O Jehovah, has become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Jehovah, hath dashed in pieces the enemy. And in the greatness of thine excellency thou hast overthrown them that rose up against thee. Thou hast sentest forth thy wrath, which consumed them as stubble. And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together. The flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. So you have this song of victory, this powerful imagery of how Jehovah swept over the Egyptians and wiped them out. And there's this idea of a flood again. And what's interesting with this idea, the symbolism of the flood and its destructive power, because the flood of waters, when it's mentioned as a flood, really that harkens back to this idea of destruction. The flood destroyed the world, not the planet, not the universe, but the people in Noah's day were wiped out. That's in Second Peter chapter 3. But then you have the flood here destroys the armies of Egypt. And then you have all throughout the Old Testament prophets, you have this idea of a flood, that God would come in the clouds of power, that he would be like a flood. And then again, you see it in Revelation, and it's this destructive power, this judgment that is brought against wicked men. And that's, I can't stress enough, there's a two-part strength to the idea of water, to this symbol of water, of not only does it destroy sin, but it also saves the righteous. It saves those who are obedient and faithful to God. So, all right, continuing on. Verse 9, the enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. Thou didst blow with thy wind, and the sea covered them. They sank as lead in the mighty waters. Okay, so the enemy, Pharaoh had this idea that he was stronger than God. Who is this Jehovah? I don't know anything about him. Remember, that's how he began this whole thing. And time again, his pride got him into trouble, and so pride eventually led to his death. Thou didst blow with thy wind, so God takes them out. And then in verse 11, who is like unto thee, O Jehovah, among the gods? So here again is that reference back to the Egyptian gods. All of the gods that were represented in the plagues was showing that these are all fake gods. And that's important. It is a vital interest to Egypt, to Israel, and to all the nations to come to understand how powerful Jehovah is, infinitely powerful, compared to the nothingness that are all these fake gods. And that is a message we see over and over and over again. These fake gods have zero power. And it is absurd. Even today, we see the statue of Molech being erected in our public squares. These idols that go up, the golden calf that we are going to see a little bit later. This is nonsense. You're worshiping dirt. Do you know how stupid that sounds to me? That you're worshiping, that whoever is putting up these idols, these fake, I'm going to make a god. I need something to worship. So I'm going to make me a god. You're worshiping dirt. It makes no sense to me at all that people would do that. But lo and behold, throughout history, people have done that. They have made up their own gods to worship. And if you make something, you are superior. So what you have done in worshiping a false god, a fake god that you made, is you are worshiping something that is less than you, that is inferior to you. Why is that logical at all? And then you have Jehovah, who time and time again shows that he is the one true and living God, that he is omnipotent, that he is powerful, and people just forgot about it. You have the Israelites who spend 1,600 years of history walking and talking with the only God that does that, and they still rebelled. I am flabbergasted at the stupidity of humanity. So yeah, Assyrian flooding the land of Israel and Judah. You're exactly right. So common theme among ancient rulers. Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. So anyway, just this idea: who is like unto thee, O Jehovah, among the gods? Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praise, doing wonders? The answer is nobody. There isn't any gods other than the one true and living God. Thou stretched out thy right hand, the earth swallowed them. Thou in thy mercy hast led forth a people which thou hast redeemed. There's that idea of redemption. We are redeemed when we are led out of sin, and that sin is destroyed and we become a new creature. Thou hast guided them in thy strength unto thy holy habitation. Where are they going? The habitation is the promised land. Now, what is that the type of? That type of promised land is a place where they have their own nation, and they can grow and be protected by God. And we eventually see the might of David and Solomon. And that is not the end of the story. That is just really and truly the beginning of the story. And we see the same thing in the New Testament. When the type is fulfilled, and the antitype is after the Jewish persecution was ended by the Romans. If you read all through the New Testament, who was the number one persecutor of the church? It was the Jews. Saul of Tarsus was the big name for a while. He went around hunting people down and bringing them before the Sanhedrin and persecuting them. And we read all through the New Testament. It wasn't the Romans. The Romans hardly ever cared. They didn't care. Everybody got to keep their own religion as long as they paid taxes and let them build roads. But the Jews hated the Christians, and they persecuted them everywhere. And they were the number one threat to that fledgling church. But then the Romans came in because the Jews revolted and wiped them out, ended the Jewish state. And that time and space, that place without that persecution, is the habitation that the church achieved, that God achieved for them there in the first century. We live in that now. And that's not the end of time. The end of time will come, and there will be a judgment day eventually, but that's not usually what the Bible is talking about. So, all right, continuing on. This is where it gets into the forward message for where they're going and why it's important what happened. So that God has wiped out the Egyptians. He's completely destroyed the Egyptian army. Okay, and then he's led his people out to a place that he promised to Abraham, that I will give it to your descendants. And now listen, verse 14: the people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina, the land of Palestine. They were going to be afraid of the coming of the Israelites. Because why? Because their God is powerful and he demonstrates that power in an obvious way. Is you can't say it didn't happen. There's no way to say that the things that God does didn't happen. Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, shall take hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm they shall be as still as stone, till thy people pass over, O Jehovah, till the people pass over, which thou hast purchased. So the all of the enemies they have yet to face, all of the people that were wicked, that their nations had been given this time to repent. Remember, they're still under patriarchy. God is not left them out. He sent people to talk to them. There are Abraham was among them, and Isaac and Jacob, and you had the priest of Moses' father-in-law. You have all of these people that were there talking to these nations, trying to get them to repent. Jethro was a priest of Midian, and so the Midianites had somebody talking to them as a go-between from God, and their wickedness got filled up, and so it was time for them to be destroyed. And so that's what happens when the Israelites come in. And then again, here we have this idea of them, the Israelites, being purchased, this redemption, this price that was paid. And we see this again in the New Testament, where Jesus is the price paid for our sins. 17, thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Jehovah, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Jehovah, which thy hands have established. Okay, so it's interesting here because the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the books of Moses, whatever you want to call them, are very interesting because they establish so many symbols that so many people get wrong later on because they aren't paying attention or they don't study deep enough. So, right, Stephen, exactly so. So, is it fair to say we're now reading of the beginning days of Israel? Yes, they have come up out of the Red Sea. They are now a nation. This is the very beginning of that nation. And then that's opposed to the last days of the first century, the last days of that nation. That's exactly right, Stephen. So one of the symbols that's being established here, the promised land is not a singular mountain. When we look at the word mountain in especially apocalyptic text, mountain is a symbol of a domain. It can be a nation. It can be the expanse of space that is ruled by a king. But the idea of the mountain is the place where a nation dwells. And it might have a lot of mountains, it might be completely flat land, but the idea behind mountain here presented, and later on throughout all the Old Testament, the idea of mountain is the domain of a ruler. And so when you get into the New Testament and you start talking about Mount Zion, Hebrews chapter 12, you have come to Mount Zion. Well, Zion's not heaven. Everybody, we're marching to Zion. No, we're not. We're already there. We're part of the church. Those of us who have been immersed into Christ, we're at Zion. We are a part of that kingdom. We are part of that nation ruled by our king. And so Mount Zion is the domain of Christ. When we talk about this mountain that they were going to be brought to, the mountain of their inheritance, this was the domain that of the physical land that God had promised to Abraham, that I'm going to give it to your descendants. So it's not a singular mountain. It is a symbol, but it's a symbol for where they would dwell. And then, of course, the sanctuary, this idea of a sanctuary, a place of peace, a place of rest, is the same thing. It's this promised place where God is going to bring them and nurture them and care for them. And again, we'll see that all throughout the Old Testament. And then 18, Jehovah shall reign forever and ever. Now, there's an interesting thought there, because we've discussed this before. Forever and ever. Reign what? Reign over what? the idea that God is the creator of the universe is well established. And in that sense, God is the king of the universe. He is the creator of it, the ruler of it, and that cannot change. That is not possible or logical to change. But in terms of those who have free will and the ability to accept his authority and do the things that he has said, to be faithful followers, or to reject that, that is a different story. You have this picture, especially you can go to 1 Samuel 8, where the people start demanding a king like all the nations around them. And God tells Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me as their king. So, in this sense, the Lord shall reign forever and ever. It's talking about, in this context, the idea of being the leader over Israel. And again, that forever is conditional upon whether the people choose to follow him or not. But here, they're all hyped up on victory that Jehovah has done. And so they're like puffed up. Wow, our God is powerful. Our God is awesome. Our God is going to do all of these great things for us. Our God is going to bring us into the land of promise. He's going to be our God forever and ever. And that's what they're singing. That's what they're saying. But notice how quickly that changes when we get here into verse 16. And then verse 19 it says, or I'm sorry, it said chapter 16. Verse 19, for the horse of Pharaoh went in with his chariots and with his horsemen into the sea, and Jehovah brought again the waters of the sea upon them. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. Okay, so that's the end of the song there in verse 18, and then in verse 19 it's kind of explaining this is why they sang the song. And then in verse 20, and Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. There's kind of a scene that's similar to this in Prince of Egypt, where Zipporah and all the girls are dancing around, the guys are clapping and stuff. That's kind of the image that I get here. Just this celebration that's going on. So comments here. Let's see here. Well, I'm against you, O destroying mountain. Yep, absolutely. The idea of mountain, the burnt mountain, the nation, the end. We are not told in the scriptures that Pharaoh himself was drowned in the sea. I thought I covered that last week, Mom. I think it does say that he was in with the army. I'm pretty sure it was explicit. I have to go back and look. I'm going to be redoing that one anyway, so when I go back and redo it, I'll try to find the verses that either state or imply that. So I thought I pointed that out, but I'll have to be clear on that when I do the run through again. So, and then I'll text you what I find. Verse 21, and Miriam answered them, sing ye to Jehovah, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. So remember, Miriam, the prophetess, is the sister of Aaron and Moses. She's a small player here. She has a little bit bigger part in the animated movie. But that's who this is the sister of Moses. She's older than Moses. So remember, Moses was a baby, and Miriam was kind of watching there in the reeds. So she's a few years older than he is. And here she is leading everybody about, dancing with timbrels. These people are hardy people. 80 is still kind of midlife for them. Maybe later midlife, but they're still midlife. So what to us would probably be around our late 50s or 60s, early 60s these days. So, verse 22, so Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And they came to Marah, and that's the first thing I pulled up here. They could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. In fact, the word Marah or Marath means bitter, or bitterness. I think Marath means bitterness. So they could not drink of it, and it was called Marah because it was bitter. And the people murmured against Moses. These are the same people that were just singing a song of victory about how powerful God was. 3 days later, they're already murmuring. They're already complaining. The people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried unto Jehovah, and Jehovah showed him, that word is tree in the King James. It says a log in the ESV. If you look it up, it's kind of a catch-all for something that's part of a tree. It could be a branch, it could be a stick, whatever. Showed him a stick, basically, which when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them, and said, now this is where the conditional stuff comes in. If, it's one of the biggest little words that I know of. If you will diligently hearken to the voice of Jehovah thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am Jehovah that healeth thee. So, the first example of ion exchange in the Bible, 14:6. Oh, is that where Pharaoh died? Oh, cool. You know what? Let me look that up since that question came up. I'll just look it up here. I've got time. The kids are doing well tonight. So Exodus 14, we'll look in verse 6. And he made ready his chariot and to. Okay, so yeah, he went with them. But it says in verse 9, but the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, so that was before they went down into the water. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians; they will follow. When I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen, in verse 18. So it sounds like Pharaoh went down with them. The idea is that it's upon Pharaoh specifically, and upon everybody that came with him. The Egyptians pursued even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Yeah, so it's implied, I think. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. And I think it's implied that Pharaoh died too. And I would have to look at the history, and that really gets into this idea of which Pharaoh are we talking about, and was his rule cut short? What happened to him and stuff. We can try to look at those histories and see how that matches up. It's not the one that most history books says, because most histories are based on an erroneous calculation of calendars that don't count overlapping pharaohs. And so I could do that as I've talked about doing that as a different video, but I haven't done that yet. So the cellulose of that tree has receptors to neutralize pH. I'm forgetting the name now, but I think it was the shittim tree. Yep. Possibly, Brian. I would imagine that it's more along the lines of miraculous, the way that it's being presented. But there's a lot of things that God does that are very natural. The laws, a lot of the laws that he makes for the Israelites have to do with things that we now know are hygienic or important for health and stuff. That were certainly not supernatural in their nature, but they were providential because God knows, and maybe the people didn't understand why they were doing these things, but God knew. So you could be right; it could be a perfectly natural thing that, and it may not have been one stick. That phrase may have been representative, where they found a number of these branches lying around, and God said, "Hey, toss those into the water, and it'll change it." Just don't have enough information here to know if this is miraculous or non-miraculous. I lean towards the miraculous because of the way that it's presented, to be so sudden, but just not enough information here to declare one way or the other. Verse 26, though, talking about those plagues, it is so powerful here, and it's not just here, it's in a number of places. God says, if you follow me, I will take care of you, and I will not bring these diseases upon you. What did Israel do? Did they keep the commandments of God? Did they do what was right in his sight? Ever. When you look, there's probably a time period under David and a little bit under Solomon. Occasionally there were good spots especially when you start talking about the southern kingdom. There were a couple of good kings and good spots, but overall, is verse 26 something that applied to Israel? Did they keep God's commandments? Did they do what was right? The answer is a resounding no. So what happens? Well, the implication is God is going to bring those plagues. Well, what do you see in Revelation? You see those plagues again in Revelation. Revelation is not talking about the end of time. Everybody's freaking out now because of COVID and now because of all the rioting and oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. No, it's not. Men have been doing dumb stuff forever, and we will continue to do that as long as God allows the universe to continue. It is not a sign of the end of time. The book of Revelation, along with everything else, look at the first few verses there, Revelation. Things which must shortly come to pass. When John was writing that, those things were going to come to pass very quickly. The time was at hand when he wrote that book over and over and over again. Jesus says, I'm coming quickly. And then we look in there, and those plagues that are in the book of Revelation are echoes of the plagues that were brought against Egypt. Who is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt in the book of Revelation? It's Israel. Israel is spiritually called Egypt. Why? Because of what's being said here. If you do what I tell you to do, because I'm trying to protect you and provide for you and heal you, then I will bless you. But if you refuse, if you go after any other gods, then you're going to be just like Egypt, and you're going to have all the same plagues. And that's exactly what happened. So let's see here. Yeah, kills the prophets. Yeah, absolutely. Matthew 23. So, verse 27 ends the chapter, and they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. So 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. So they basically found an oasis out in the wilderness. This is again, they are now into the Arabian area here, and so chapter 16. And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin. Now, that's one of the things that I looked up. I was like, wait a minute, the wilderness of Sin. But that is a transliteration of a word. It's originally Ciyn. And, of course, there's actually the Hebrew. But this word in the Hebrew means thorn or clay. And it's a tract of wilderness. Where it was probably thorny and clay, and there wasn't much land there to till, or wasn't a great land to be in terms of wanting to settle down. So let's see here. Stephen puts up Revelation 11:8, and there the dead bodies will lie. Yeah, that's what I was referencing. He's exactly right. Thank you, Stephen. So they come to this place called Sin. It just is a thorny, clay-filled place, a barren area, not good for growing things, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. So they've been traveling for about a month now. Time is passing. Remember, we cover these things sometimes fast. We definitely cover them very fast in our Bible classes when we're young. And a lot of times, because we travel, we go so fast through the passages, we don't highlight how much time is passing here. So we're 15 days in the second month. Remember, they left on the 15th day of the first month. So we're now a month out. And I think that's probably why the guys that put the chapters and verses and put this as a chapter is, hey, okay, we're starting a new chapter here. So verse 2, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Man, they complain. It reminds me of Luke Skywalker, right? That kid in episode 4, which is my favorite Star Wars movie, is episode 4, the beginning of it all. But Luke is such a whiner about everything. He grows up. He definitely is way better in Empire Strikes Back, and when you get to Return of the Jedi, he's this cool Jedi guy, very composed and all of that. But episode 4, oh, he's such a brat. And that's what I see when I see this, that Israel is murmuring against Moses and Aaron. They're just constantly whining about stuff. So verse 3, and the children of Israel said unto them, to Moses and Aaron, Would to God we had died by the hand of Jehovah in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots. So that word flesh pots, it's like meat pots. It's stews, that kind of thing. And when we did eat bread to the full, for you have brought us forth into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So they're whining because they're hungry. They don't have enough to eat. They've definitely run out of supplies by this time, all the food they brought with them, because a month has passed. All the rations are gone that they brought with them. And so they're like, we're going to die of starvation. We should have just stayed in Egypt. Constantly character development. Love it. Yeah. So unfortunately, Israel, you talk about character development of Luke Skywalker is what the reference is. Luke grows up. Israel doesn't, ever. Israel is always that whiny brat, constantly complaining, constantly getting into trouble, never learning any lessons. So they don't have any character development. They're just a bunch of brats the whole time. Whew, they're absolutely frustrating to me, by the way. So anyway, so they're complaining and whining about dying of hunger. I'm pretty sure that they weren't as bad off as what their complaining indicates. Then said Jehovah unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. So God is still taking care of them. God is still providing for them. Would that it was so easy that every morning you could just wake up, walk out into your backyard, and scoop up the bread you were going to eat that day. Never have to go to the grocery store. Never have to worry about where's the food going to come from. That's amazing to me that God provided. You just walk out your door and scoop it up off the ground, take it in, and it's good. And then, of course, they had quail at night, which we'll get to. But, having that just, like, come right to your door like that, that's pretty cool. And then he says that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. Now, that word prove there, or test them, remember, God is omniscient. He doesn't test people to find out anything. He already knows. What is the proving for? The proving is for the person being tested. Okay? I'm a teacher. I teach physics. Used to, I guess. I'm not teaching it this year, sadly. Teaching math. And when I give a test as a teacher, I'm trying to find out something. It's a metric. I'm trying to learn if the students learned anything. And yes, this test is also for the students to learn what they have learned, to show themselves what they know. But God doesn't need these tests for himself. He already knows. He's proving them to themselves. He's showing them, hey, you need to learn these lessons. And so he gives them some tests. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely, Stephen. Deuteronomy 9:7. Nate says, yeah, sign me up for the food from the manna from heaven and the quail all the time. Yeah, absolutely. So, anyway, so he's going to prove them. He's going to test them, see how they do. And it shall come to, not for him to see how they was, to show them how they're going to do it. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So Sunday through Thursday they gather just enough for the day. Friday they gather twice as much, because Saturday they don't get to do any. And Moses and Aaron said, and that was just the instructions. God just says, do this. And Moses and Aaron said unto all the children of Israel, at even then you shall know that Jehovah has brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning then you shall see the glory of Jehovah, for he hears your murmurings against Jehovah. And what are we that you're murmuring against us? He's like, your complaining is against God. Who are we? Moses and Aaron, we don't have any power. Why are you complaining against us? Why are you saying anything to us? We don't, take it up with God. But understand that this God is the one that saved you from Egypt, and this is the God that destroyed your enemies, and this is the God that has provided you water in the wilderness, and now you're complaining against him? Not the right way to ask. Sometimes my kids are kind of like that. Dad, where's dinner? Is that the way to ask your dad to help to prepare dinner for you? That's not a very nice way to ask. Dad, I'm hungry. No. Hey, Dad, can I help you fix dinner? Hey, Dad, uh, would you be willing to fix dinner now for us? Because I'm getting a little hungry. There's a way to ask, and I have to remind them of that. And they're getting better. They're getting way better about it. But that's what Israel sounds like to me. God, we're hungry. When's dinner? And Moses is like, why are you whining? So, anyway, Moses said, This shall be when Jehovah shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full. For Jehovah hears your murmurings, which you murmur against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against Jehovah. So he kind of reprimands them there. And then, oh, what did I say here? Yeah, and then verse 9. And Moses spoke unto Aaron, saying, Unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before Jehovah, for he has heard your murmurings. And it came to pass as Aaron spoke, because remember, Aaron's kind of the eloquent speaker here. Moses is not a great speaker, so Aaron does, actually, he's the mouthpiece here. As Aaron spake unto the whole congregation of the children of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of Jehovah appeared in the cloud. So here God is appearing to them again in the form of a cloud. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, not to everybody, but to Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, At even you shall eat flesh, that's the quail, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am Jehovah your God. And it came to pass that at evening even the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host. So God provides for them, and it's not just enough. The whole camp is covered out. God provides an abundance. When he provides his blessings, it's overflowing all the time. And it was their job to take enough for the day and to trust that God was going to continue to provide for them every day. And so that's what the test is. In verse 14, and when the dew that lay was gone, up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. So it was a little bitty tiny thing, kind of about the size of a seed, and they would just go around scooping it all up. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, It is manna, for they wist not what it was. They didn't know what it was. And Moses said unto them, This is the bread which Jehovah hath given you to eat. Now here is the metaphor, the type. God is providing the bread that they may live. And in the New Testament, Jesus provides the bread of life, his words. He shows this in the loaves and the fishes. He is the provider of that which we need to live, the sustenance that we need, the spiritual sustenance. Break thou the bread of life. It is the word of God. And so that is the manna from heaven for us. And just like the Israelites, we need to take it up daily. We need to look at it daily. One of the reasons that so many people get all of the Old Testament so wrong is they sit in their pews and they listen, and they have somebody else tell them what to believe, and they go to commentaries and they have somebody else tell them what to believe, but they don't actually study for themselves. That's not saying that commentaries are bad. That's not saying that the sermon on Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings is bad. What's saying is that, like the Bereans, you need to be studying for yourself to see that everything that's being taught is true. And you will be so much stronger for doing your own studies on top of listening to this. You know, if I thought commentaries were bad, I wouldn't be doing this, because this is a commentary, right? You guys are listening to me. I'm commentating on what I think the Bible says. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm glad it's interactive. I'm glad people are posting up comments and we're talking through this with each other. But the idea is you should get your Bible out every day and study, because that's manna from heaven, and God intends for us to scoop that up every day and live on that daily. And so that's the type here that we see with this physical bread that fed them physically. And then verse 16, This is the thing which Jehovah has commanded, gather of it every man according to his eating, an omer for every man according to the number of your persons. So they were supposed to go out and grab an omer, this measurement for every person. It was enough for a day. Take ye every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered some more, some less. And when they did meet it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. The idea here is that nobody was going hungry. When they brought it all in, they kind of measured it out. For those who couldn't gather a lot, this isn't about those who were lazy, but this is about those who perhaps didn't have the maybe older people or maybe young children or something. If they went out and they tried to gather as much as they were supposed to, and they just couldn't do it physically, they didn't lack. God didn't say, "Okay, you go hungry because you didn't do enough." That's not what He was trying to do here. And those that were able to gather more, if they went kind of overboard and were zealous, they had enough. Not that they were trying to disobey. So I think the idea here of this passage, this verse 18, was that God was providing for everybody as they needed. And it didn't matter if they couldn't do it for themselves. God was filling up where they lacked for themselves. And I think God does that for us. The idea of we give our best to God, our best effort for God, but there isn't anything we can do to save ourselves. God's grace is what saves us. Now, people don't understand what grace is, but God's grace is what saves us. But that doesn't mean we don't have any part in it. That doesn't mean we sit back and let God do everything and there's no part for us. We go out and we fill up our basket with manna. We go out and we do the work to the best of our ability. And then where our ability isn't enough, that's where God's grace, His mercy, His love fills up that basket for us. And I think this is the message that's being sent here. Verse 19, and Moses said, "Let no man leave of it until morning." Notwithstanding, they did not listen to Moses. They hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left of it until the morning, and it bred worms, and it stank. And Moses was mad with them. he was upset. And why aren't you listening? And so they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating. And when the sun waxed hot, it melted. And it came to pass. And so, in other words, if whatever was left out on the ground when the sun came out and got really hot at noontime or whatever, it was gone. And it came to pass that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said unto them, "This is that which Jehovah has commanded. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Jehovah." Now we haven't got to Exodus 20 yet. Okay, but here they're already introducing this idea of the Sabbath. So Moses is saying tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Jehovah. Bake that which you will bake today, and see that which you will see, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. So he says tomorrow you're not supposed to work. So he's already establishing this idea of the Sabbath. They will cover why in Exodus 20, but here they're just establishing it with the idea of the manna. It's specifically to the manna and what they were supposed to do and not do. But he's kind of precursoring it. So check on some. All right. So any type of the manna for 40 years, and the pouring out of the Spirit was 40 years. Well, yeah, Stephen, in a way, the 40 years, the miraculous was the delivering of the word, right? That's what the inspired writers were doing. They were the people who had the ability to communicate directly the message of God. For those 40 years, you're talking about that establishment period from the time the church was founded to the time it was considered fully established, up until I think what I believe to be the writing of Jude is the last book of the Bible, towards the end of the first century there. I think that definitely has a lot to do with it. I also think that God in His providence provided that manna, and then that was all they needed, because then once they got into the land, they could farm the land for themselves, right? Once they got into the land of the Canaan and they settled their places, they could tend to their own places, their own crops, their own food. So, yeah, I believe that has a lot to do with it. I think you're exactly right there. So, 9.3 cups equals 1 omer dry volume. Wow, 9.3 cups of uh, bread substance, kind of like flour or whatever. Wow. Yes, Indiana Jones. Nice. So, all right. So he tells them about the Sabbath. He says, you're not supposed to gather any on the Sabbath, so gather twice as much on Friday, what we call Friday. And they laid up until the morning as Moses bade them, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. So there's definitely something miraculous going on at this point, because every day that they did that it wasn't the Sabbath the next day, worms and it stunk. They do it on Friday, and the next morning doesn't stink, no worms. Definitely miraculous there. And Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto Jehovah. Today you shall not find it in the field. So there wasn't any manna on the ground. Definitely miraculous. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the seventh day, because they're stubborn as all get out, and they're not going to listen. So they went out on the seventh day for to gather, and they found none. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, how long refuse you to keep my commandments and my laws? That's not Jehovah getting mad at Moses. That's Jehovah getting mad at the Israelites through Moses. See, for Jehovah has given you the Sabbath. It was a gift to them, a day of rest. Instead of having to work 7 days, just every day of your life, you work 6 days and then you get a day off. That's pretty awesome. Okay? And they didn't take it. They didn't listen. They went out, tried to find some manna, and God gets mad at them. I have given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the sixth day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. Stay in your house. Chill out. Take a day off. I mean, he was mad at them because they weren't relaxing. So the people rested on the seventh. They got it. They eventually got it. So the people rested on the seventh day. And the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. It's limbus bread, y'all. That's all it is. It's limbus bread. It's elven way bread. So, and Moses said that this is the thing which Jehovah has commanded. Fill an omer of it to be kept for your generation. So they fill an omer, and they're eventually gonna put that in the Ark of the Covenant. And it's going to stay there, and it never goes bad or whatever. So that they may see the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. So remember that, because we're not going to hear about it for a little while. But they filled an omer, 1 omer that they were supposed to collect, their daily collection, and they were going to fill it, and they were going to put it in a container and just keep it. Moses said unto Aaron, take a pot and put an omer full of manna therein, and lay it up before Jehovah to be kept for your generations. And as Jehovah commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. So that word testimony there is capitalized. It's, I think, a kind of the idea here is it's a special word. It's not just the word testimony, but I think there's a little bit more to it. It's eduth in the Hebrew, which is the testimony or witness. I don't know why they capitalized it, but I think it has something to do with the idea of it being this evidence that they're going to have carried around with them and then eventually put into the temple with the Ark of the Covenant for as long as they have access to it. So, and the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years. Now remember, these guys have only been out of Egypt for a month when this all gets with all the manna and the quail and stuff. So Moses is writing here at the end of that time. He doesn't write this as they go. He's writing this towards the end as they're about to come into the promised land. And so he writes this, and the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came to the land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came into the borders of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is the 10th part of an ephah, because we have, like, I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, sure. But there are others who are more scholarly than I. Apparently Brian is one of these, talking about the 9.3 cups or whatever. So lo and behold, what do they do? Yeah, over and over again. Hebrew for manna is footnoted as man. I don't get that. It was Miller wafers. No, I'm telling you, it's Limpa bread. It's elven way bread. The hobbits were trying to eat too much of it. Oh, so uh, the idea is that they ate this for 40 years, and I think Stephen makes a great point is that the 40 years, because there's a direct correlation between the wilderness wandering for 40 years and the establishment period of the church for 40 years. You have this time period that coincides perfectly, and there's every jot and tittle, every detail of the Old Testament matters. It's so much pointing to the New Testament and the coming of the Christ, the coming of the Anointed One, and Him as King, Him as sacrificial Lamb, His bride, His church, and the establishment of it, the end of Israel. You're going to see a lot about that. The end of the Israelite state, the Jewish state, and the establishment of this new spiritual kingdom that is the better, that shall never be destroyed, according to Daniel 2:44. The everlasting kingdom that would be there, and actually be a spiritual kingdom that would survive the end of time, where the Israelites were just a physical type, a shadow that would pass away. Hebrews 8:13, and so just the idea that the the 40 years and the manna that they ate coincides with the 40 years that they were establishing the church, and the as Stephen said, the spiritual manna being brought down from heaven through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, who inspired the writers, who gave it to the prophets in every congregation, those that the apostles laid their hands on to be able to teach. Remember, they didn't have they couldn't go down to Walmart and buy a Bible. They had very few copies there at the very beginning, and so they had to teach a lot orally. But they had the Holy Spirit there to make sure that they were teaching it right, to get it correct, because that was so important. As the inspired writers were writing everything down, and then as they got more and more copies spread around, then they had the completed written form, that which was perfect would eventually come in 1 Corinthians 13. And then the need for that miraculous, that like what Stephen was saying, the manna coming from heaven, that wouldn't be there anymore. There wouldn't be any need for miracles anymore. And I believe they passed out of the world, that God doesn't work through miracles after the first century AD, because he doesn't need to. That's just scaffolding. It's, as Paul calls it, it's children's toys. Miracles were baby rattles, time for the infancy of the church. And when you grow up, you don't play with those toys anymore. And so I think that's a great comparison that you made, Stephen. That's exactly right. So, and Brian says, your verse 34, has Aaron placed it before the pact to be kept, with testimony in the footnote for pact. Yeah, so there's an importance, like, above just the normal use of the word testimony or witness there. I think there's a reason that it's capitalized in the King James. So there's a little bit more weight to the word for some reason, and so that's there. Well, anyway, that's 15 and 16. Thanks, guys, for joining. That was a good 30 minutes. Oh, that was a good. I started at 9. Wow, so that was an hour. That went by fast. So a whole hour. That's great. That's awesome. Thank you for joining, and I appreciate you sticking with me. Yeah, some agreement with God. I think you're dealing with this contractual idea here, Brian. I think you're right about that. There's that conditional that is already stated, and you're gonna see if and if and if over and over again. This idea of a conditional contract, a conditional, and God's covenant with mankind is always, the Old Testament and the New Testament are conditional. What is 1 John 1:7? If you walk in the light as he is in the light, his blood continually cleanses you. If you love me, keep my commandments. There's always this condition that God says, if you will do this, then I have already done that, and you can have access to it. So I think you're right. I think that agreement is the correct idea. The covenant, the contract is the right idea there. So thank you guys for joining. I'm gonna go check on the kiddos, make sure they're all sleeping well. I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll be back tomorrow night. So take care.